The company Solar States is teaming up with the Philadelphia School District to help prepare students for careers using solar energy.
Solar States flipped the switch of the largest solar panel array in Philadelphia.
Welcome back to another episode of Yo, Son! Welcome back to another episode of Yo, Son! I'm your host, Micah Goldmarkel, here with
Jared Pashko. And today on the show, I think this is our most famous guest ever, Micah. We have Brian Regli, the executive director of Critical Investments.
To get better people. You need to get better people. If I'm the most famous person you got, man, we're gonna get you more famous people.
This is a big day for the Yo Son podcast, you know?
Yeah.
We're going places. We're talking to somebody directly connected to the governor's office of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, there we go. And it's a real pleasure to have you on the show, Brian. And as Jared mentioned, you're sitting there at a time of great need, I would say, for critical investments. So thank you for coming on the show.
No, it's a real privilege. You guys are obviously one of the leading companies in the region to do the incredibly important work of trying to help our energy transition and try to help us create better energy sources for all of us. And Lord knows we need it. So thank you guys for your work and the opportunity to be part of the conversation.
Cool. Well, sort of in that vein, the state of Pennsylvania has been an energy hub for the U.S. for decades, whether we're talking about coal, nuclear, certainly shale gas has been dominating for years now. Wind and solar seem to be coming on strong. We're very familiar. We talked a little bit about this before the show, about the challenges with changing the status quo around energy in PA. But you guys seem to be getting it done more effectively. And, I look at Rep. Fiedler's Solar for Schools as an example of that. We've been trying to get better solar legislation in the state of PA forever. Now it seems to be happening. How are you guys doing it? How are we ushering through a new era in Pennsylvania?
Well, look, I think there's a combination of things that are going on. And the most important starting point for it is the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, it really begins with this transformative piece of legislation that the Biden administration was able to work through Congress. And the benefits that it provides to, all kinds of communities, be they Republican or Democratic, and ultimately the tax credits, which I'll talk a little bit about today, to my mind, create this entirely new framework for how individuals and organizations and not-for-profits and governments and companies can invest in solar and alternative energy. So it starts with that because the economic incentives are there and they're the right incentives for this energy transition. At the same time, the market is changing. And you guys know this, and we'll talk a little bit about this today. But even in the last couple of days, people are beginning to see the signs of the effects of decarbonization, deep decarbonization, and the hyperscalers that are beginning to appear on the grid. We saw just in this week's auction at PJM, extraordinary potential increases in costs to consumers over the next few years if we don't start creating more and more generation. So there's two ways to do that, obviously. Dispatchable energy, which is part of what Pennsylvania has as its strength. You mentioned it, right? We export 35% of our electricity. We have a diverse set of energy resources here in the Commonwealth, and the governor wants to see that continue. But at the same time, if we don't start getting local generation working, if we don't start getting distributed generation working, if we don't start doing demand response better, we're not going to really be able to prepare the grid of the future. And frankly, the energy needs of the future are going to be left wanting. So I think a lot of it is, yes, we have good policy at the federal level. Yes, I think we have great policy at the state level, but the market is actually the wind at our sails. And the Inflation Reduction Act provides even more acceleration for that. So from my perspective, it's a great opportunity. It's a great time to be part of that world and that level of change. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about, how that's going to emerge or how we think it's going to emerge in the coming years.
That's great. Well, I think you really... Man, that was a densely packed.
Yeah, you want a job as a sales guy?
I gotta stretch out a few of those sentences here, Brian.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot.
Well,
Am I making mental notes? Okay,
go
back.
There's a lot to unpack in everything that you guys do too. Yeah.
So, let's start with energy markets and PJM. For some of our less sophisticated listeners, can you talk about the role that a PJM plays and sort of how energy markets work and how demand response and how you can sort of predict the future of energy prices?
So this is a rapidly changing space. And even though energy utilities have spent generations, pulling together these power pools that help people share electrons as they go across the grid,
Right.
What's really happened in the last 20, 25 years, you have this organization, which in Pennsylvania is called PJM, which stands for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, and it expands to, I think it's 11 states if my memory serves. Basically, they're our Interconnection Service Organization, our ISO. And what the ISO does is they basically construct a market, and they say to all the generators, hey, bid into this market and tell us what the price will be in 2 or 3 years, because ultimately they're trying to make sure that there's enough electrons on the grid at any given time to make sure that all of our appliances work, right? And we flip on the electricity and it works. To do that, not only do you need to meet the requirement of the grid at any given moment, you also need to know that there are wide variations, right? In the summer, everybody's running their air conditioning unit. In the winter, everybody's running the toilet, right? So there's a certain amount of additional capacity that's built into that market. And they're always trying to make sure that that market is robust enough to serve the needs at any given time. So over the last 20 to 25 years, demand has been very, very stable. And so that ISO has been able to run a market that's pretty consistent, and everybody kind of understood what that market would be. Now you're in an environment where the centrally dispatched resources, the places where people generate electricity, a power plant in the middle of Pennsylvania that might be running on natural gas, that is a certain resource that's available and dispatchable by that ISO at any given time. But in a world where now more electrons are required, or there's data centers that are coming online, or everybody's plugging in their phone, the variability and the growth is now
huge.
It's huge.
Right.
Huge.
Yep.
So the strategy for anybody who's thinking about solar is this: can I make a capital investment today that will lock in the price of my electricity in an environment where the commodity prices are going to vary substantially and may actually increase as demand increases? Mm-hmm. The reason why that piece of legislation that you mentioned, the Solar for Schools legislation that Representative Elizabeth Fiedler got through the House and through the Senate in Pennsylvania, again, a Republican Senate and a Democratic House and a Democratic governor, very, very, very hard work. It's going to help schools essentially levelize their cost of electricity, lean into the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, create all kinds of benefits to make sure that their operational costs go down. And what that does for us as a social benefit now is the ISO, PJM, needs electrons from these dispatchable resources, but they're not going to need it for that school in the middle of the summer that's running its air conditioners really, really hot because of the summer schools, right? Right. We're going to have the solar panels there, and the electric buses are going to get charged off the solar panels, which means there's less pollution. And all of that is paid for by the Inflation Reduction Act, because the tax credits in the IRA not only are for companies, but they're also for schools. They're for governments. The direct pay infrastructure that we are helping to build at the state, which I'd love to talk a little bit about today, is going to help make sure that every school district that gets money from Solar for Schools or gets money from their local school district can get the tax credits that come to them in the form of cash payments. So ultimately, the strategy right now for everybody is leverage your capital dollars very wisely. Try to find ways to avoid a circumstance where those energy spikes that are an inevitable part of the evolution of the energy markets don't affect the operations of your business or your school or your community or your house. And that's where solar is going to play such a crucial role in our energy transition and how Pennsylvania manages its energy complex in the coming years.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had the great fortune of working with a number of schools, but I got to tell you, we have a ton of young kids, teenagers that build these green committees, and they come to us and they say, we're presenting in front of the school board and we are demanding that our school goes electric. Can you help us show them what solar looks like? And we put together some information, and it's just such a great piece of the story. Is it's not just the commodity and the cash flow and the capital investments that the schools are making, but it's a social good as well. This is what students and parents are asking for.
And look, Jared, I'd actually like to ask you a question about that, because although I understand, and look, I'm very much a believer that, to fight the challenges of climate change, we are going to need extraordinary investments and extraordinary leadership. But ultimately, because I'm a business person, I come from the private sector, I usually talk about cash flows as the starting point, right? For me, it's about how do you save money on an operational expense, or how do you capitalize an investment in a way that improves the operations of a location? Do you think in your conversations with these young individuals that they understand that is part of what you're trying to do, educate, in those areas? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I have come to learn, we've worked with a half dozen or so institutions, schools, and universities where we've been able to successfully put solar on. And what I've seen almost every single time is a decade of planning. And so if a decade of planning starts with a couple high schoolers asking for their school to go solar to help the environment, and that leads to a school board doing a feasibility study and a CFO of a school district doing a cash flow analysis, that still doesn't get budgeted into a school infrastructure project for a couple years. And so we got to start somewhere. And I'll take all the above, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, and I'd like to take a swing at that too, Brian. I young people, and I used to count myself among those.
I was going to say, man, I got a lot of gray hair. I hate to say it.
A lot of gray hair.
I'm not there anymore.
Oh man, it's a hard reality.
It is. Really, but that's all right, man. We still got a lot to offer. We're just so good people.
So young people are just so full of optimism, right? And also gumption. Like they're going to come to it. They're passionate. They have all this stuff that they want done.
But let me ask you on that one. I'm going to push this a little bit here because I find a lot of young people who have this inherent fatalism that we're going to burn the earth down and the world is falling apart and nothing good can happen. There's
some of that. There's definitely some of that. But I also hear we know what the frustration. I think it's more frustration. It's solar's out there. We know solar's out. Why aren't we doing this? Why isn't this happening? Right. And then you've sort of got to talk about a little bit of, hey, if you do anything too fast, it's dangerous. We can't risk instability on the grid. We have to have the policy, which thank goodness, as you mentioned, with the IRA and the state now on board, we have the policy all sort of rowing in the same direction. And then we have to have the for lack of a better way, the numbers make sense. Right. And I think with solar, the numbers making sense that's just really started in the last 5, 6, 7 years. The cost of panels has come down enough. We've seen, and I think this is a major story that is not being told. There's all of this talk about government overreach and this, that, and the other. We all know every major innovation in the United States, whether it was the internet, highways, all of these things, they started with government funding, right? I mean, the internet was a project of the Defense Department, right? I mean, it came out. And so we're 100%. Seeing that same seeding with the solar industry, where we're seeding it for private industry to then take the next steps. It's like helping with R&D. But the problem is... Go ahead.
No, you go. The problem is...
I'm going to say the problem is, and this is where I'd like your insight, is that everybody didn't see it that way, and particularly in the legislature. And what I've been wowed with is the effectiveness of the governor to bring Republicans and Democrats. When we've been trying this for years, he actually did it. He got us together and got us going in the right direction.
Well, so we still have a ways to go, right? And part of it, to your point, is sort of the continuing dialogue that you have to have between different ideological frameworks and different ways of looking at the world. I mean, the reason why I'm a Democrat is because I believe government can do good things. I grew up, young person, Ronald Reagan showed up and said, government's the problem. And I couldn't buy into that. And that's why I ended up being a Democrat. And I still believe that government does cause problems, right?
Sure.
Government can create solutions, right? So to your point, government can be innovative. Government can create industrial policy that drives domestic investment. Government sometimes is not the best allocator of resources. Is the reason why I would never consider myself a socialist. I lived in Eastern Europe when socialism was there. That's not the way to allocate resources. And I know, there's probably some people listening to this podcast who might view themselves from that ideological perspective. I still think that markets do great things when they are oriented and regulated the right way. So to your point, I know of at least 3 potential, I can't talk about them publicly, but 3 potential investments of greater than $400 million in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in producing new solar equipment and manufacturing and materials and panels.
Wow.
Why are those being contemplated?
Yay!
Yes. Tell me about it, right?
Yeah.
I hope 1 or 2 of them happen because when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, and again, your listeners, might not know this. I know you guys do. There's a 30% investment tax credit, ITC, when you use prevailing wage and when you make an investment in a solar array. You can build $1 million solar array, you get a $300,000 tax credit, right? If you use domestically manufactured materials, and I know you guys are struggling to get the sourcing for that, right? That's an additional 10%. So it's a $400,000 tax credit rather than a $300,000 tax credit. And then there's energy communities and brownfields and other adders that we can get into and affordable housing. But stick on that 10% for a second, right? if I'm spending $1 million, maybe what ends up happening, because I want to have domestically manufactured panels, I'm spending $1.1 million, right?
Right.
Because now the domestic manufacturer is going to get the yield associated with that. And we can get into the discussions about the efficacy of tariffs versus local incentives. And, I do have a PhD in economics. We could spend a couple hours on this if you want. God bless you. I don't suggest it. But for right now, because we gave so much of this industry to the Chinese, because we outsource so much of this things to other countries, it is the right policy. And if you listen to even J.D. Vance, he would tell you it's the right policy right now, because he's saying the same things at the Republican convention. Because we all understand that reshoring is important, and it's a question of determining where these incentives flow and how we help to manage them. So now I'm going to go back to, hold on, I want to go back to the student that you're trying to teach about why solar makes sense from a cash flow perspective, right? Everybody understands subscription services. They're paying for YouTube. They're paying for Spotify, whatever it may happen to be, right? You're paying $2 a month, $3 a month, $4 a month, whatever it may happen to be. If you could take that subscription service and you could pay for it one time in your life, right? And at the same time get a discount because you're paying it up front. And on top of it, the government gives you back some of the money that you spend on your Spotify subscription so that you never have to pay for Spotify again.
Right.
You would certainly look at finding a way to pay for that one-time investment to have access to that utility for the rest of your days.
That's a great way of putting it.
That is essentially what solar is doing, right?
Sure.
Instead of it being Spotify, it's your electric bill. Instead of it being your computer, it's the roof of your school. All of these things about changing your spend plan is a really important lesson for young people to understand why you invest in a capital like you buy a house rather than rent a house. It's the same sort of issue, just multiplied into the energy complex in a way that I think everybody should understand. And then you add the tax credits on top of that. You add the fact that the school gets a check as a result of that. That is immensely powerful.
That is.
This is reminding me of the Dope Student podcast, Mike.
Yeah, the Dope Student podcast. That's right.
I was on.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Tell Brian and the listeners
we have
about this.
Actually, as part of the funding from the DOE, we were a part of the Bright Solar Futures education initiative, where we wrote a 1,000-hour curriculum. Shout out to the Philadelphia. Yeah, I was a big part of that.
Cool.
It's very cool. And I got to give a shout out to Emily Shapiro and the Philadelphia Energy Authority.
Emily is awesome. If she's listening, why are you listening? You already know these things, Emily. Go back and help us, because you're great.
So, but we tried to sort of walk students through this value proposition where, hey, you're paying up front for a certain amount of energy, but you're getting so much more.
Yeah.
And then, the sort of how solar works stuff. But I want to go back to this point of onshoring, because I think this is a really important point that is frequently missed in our discussions, which is the sort of carrot and stick of governmental incentives versus tariffs, right? Incentives being the carrot, tariffs being the stick. Right. And we saw a previous administration pretty much all stick, all tariffs, all the time, just tariff. And, in some respects, you got to take a look at that as a strategy, but clearly it didn't bring any manufacturing back to America. I mean, there was nothing that happened in terms of bringing solar panel manufacturing. Then the Biden administration comes in, and instead of saying we're all stick, they throw the carrots out there, and all of a sudden we're seeing this explosion of manufacturing coming back. Do you think that this is recognized by the public, that this has happened?
I don't think it's recognized yet, and that's part of the challenge, because when you do any construction, you guys know this because you're essentially in the construction business, obviously very, very specialized, but no project happens overnight. Every project has a huge lead time. My job for the governor's office is to look at the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There's $20 billion of formula funds. We've been fortunate enough to win competitively another $1.2 billion over the course of the last year. It's been a great set of victories for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. All of these are very complex, long-tail projects that quite often take years to execute and then decades to realize the benefits of. So part of the challenge in public policy is articulating the value of something that has not yet been done, but is in the process of being done. And you can see it in the economic data. You can see it in the fact that we have, even today on Friday, the 2nd of August, where you had a little bit of a job slowdown, you still have some of the strongest economic numbers you could possibly imagine compared to every country in the United States. The extraordinary growth right now that's coming to the United States is in great part because of the infrastructure investments we're making writ large. And the energy infrastructure is a crucial part of that. We're producing more energy today than we have ever produced in the history of the United States across all of these various areas, right? Mm-hmm. So now, to your point about carrots and sticks, the Shapiro administration comes in and we develop an energy policy that we proposed in March of this year, where we talk about two particular components: updating our alternative energy standards. It's basically a process that we have been looking at for a long time. And there's 21 different types of energy that we think are important parts of the all of the above energy complex. And solar is one of them. And interestingly enough, as part of our proposal, solar as a tier 1 resource can also get kind of a double credit if you include storage, because storage, when it's charged from a tier 1 resource like solar, gets an additional credit. And why do we do that? Because again, resiliency. We want to have the right carrots in the right place. At the same time, we are in the process of trying to manage, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the RGGI, proposal that was put forward by the Wolf administration. We have continued to defend it in court because we believe that the executive order should stand. But at the same time, the governor has been very, very clear. We put forward in our PACER program the idea of creating a Pennsylvania-only version of it, that the legislature would have a voice in setting the cap and determining how the rules would be established. Again, the idea being at the state level, we should have carrots. We should have sticks. We've got 21 different ways to generate new electricity, and we have ways to make sure that the transition through a cap and invest program gets us to where we want to be in terms of carbon emissions and decarbonization. That's the sort of opportunity I think that everybody in every corner of the political spectrum should at least embrace the discussion. And that's part of the challenge in this environment, is because, oh my God, a Democrat has an idea, it must be evil. A Republican has an idea, it must be evil. That's not correct. There's a lot of good ideas. How do we work together to identify the good ones, depoliticize the conversation, come up with a way to move forward together? It's extraordinarily hard. So the small steps, even though they may feel very, very consequential, $25 million for solar for schools is an extraordinary step. But boy, we could do so much more than that. Yeah. If we can lean into the governor's policies, we can lean into the Inflation Reduction Act, we can bring labor to bear in so many unique ways, and we can find an extraordinary story for Pennsylvania to maintain its energy leadership through all of these policies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think part of this, and it becomes such a complex conversation because people have all sorts of feelings about climate change. You've mentioned this and obviously Jared and I are sitting here. We understand the science of it. It's very clear, climate change is happening. We need to react to it. Right. But you have that. It's hard to have that conversation with, a lot of people. And I think if you tack to this is about jobs. And it's good paying jobs. People tend to think that this stuff costs money instead of saving money. And that's one of the hardest things that I've found is how do we, here's an example of it. And this is maybe a bit of an obtuse example, but I ran into the CEO of a major engineering firm in Philadelphia. And I started talking to him. He said, oh man, yeah, we're doing all sorts of solar projects. We're doing the engineering for utility scale projects. It's booming. It's this, it's that. I go, oh, that's great. That's great. I go, the Inflation Reduction Act, really great piece of legislation. He says back to me, well, I think that might be not well spent money. And I'm sitting there and I'm shocked. And I'm like, I don't think they understand.
So no, I don't think they do either. I don't think they do either. And let's talk about this for a second, because I think it's really important. I want to compare the Inflation Reduction Act to the Trump tax cuts, right? And I will tell you that there are things about the Trump tax cuts that I actually think make some sense, especially relative to small business and the idea of capital formation. There's important pieces of that. But here's the problem. With the Trump tax cuts, you get it no matter what. You don't have to do anything to get it, right? With the Inflation Reduction Act, you don't get the credit until you do the thing. You have to do the thing to get the thing. So what does that mean concretely, right? If I don't invest $1 million in the solar array, I don't get the $300,000 of tax credits. I don't get the $400,000 of tax credits. In the Trump scenario, because you ran a business, you got it no matter what, right? Yeah. In this scenario, you make the investment. So then, all right, we're giving away tax dollars. Now let's think about this for a second. The Republicans argue that the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits may be costing the American taxpayer $500 billion. Let's assume that's the case. Let's do some basic math. Let's assume everybody gets 30% on their investment tax credits, right? And they're going to get less than that because of certain types of investments in states, whatever. But let's assume that for the sake of argument. That means there have been $1.5 trillion of energy investments in the United States. Are you telling me you don't want $1.5 trillion of investment?
Yeah.
Are you telling me you would rather not have that investment? See, from my perspective, that's not a sensible policy prescription, especially in a world where energy prices are going to go up, because we've talked about that. The geopolitics requires us to even double down on energy independence. And yet you have Republicans who are saying, and I think from an ideological lens that is inappropriate, when you really think about the purpose of capital formation and entrepreneurial risk, which is the core of some of what are the great Republican policies over the last 150 years, this should make perfect sense. You do the thing, you get the thing. If you don't do the thing, you don't deserve it, so you don't get the thing.
That's right. That's
And
right. I
that's
haven't
what the
described
Inflation
it.
Reduction Act is.
That's a great description. That's a great description. I haven't quite heard those two things compared. You got to do something to get something like that.
And so
seems
you make
so
the investment in solar,
simple.
you make the capital investment, you get the benefits, you can stabilize the cost of your operation. And you may not believe in climate change, and I may disagree with you vehemently and passionately about, that particular perspective. But at the same time, the math is the math, right? You say, well, we don't want to all be about solar and wind. I don't really care ultimately relative to your perspective, this particular circumstance. Why would you not invest in solar? I'll give you an extreme example, Mike. I'll give you an extreme example. I've had conversations with the CEOs of coal companies. And quite often one of their biggest expenses is their electricity bill. And I'm looking at like 600 acres that's running next to the long wall, and I'm like, you could just put like 40 gigawatts, 40 megawatts of solar over there, and like not pay anything. And they look at me like I'm falling out of a cloud. I'm like, I am not here to judge you for having the mineral rights that you have, right? I'm just here to tell you that if you installed solar here and your bills went down to zero and you weren't pulling resources from the grid that are needed elsewhere, it's good for you and it's good for everybody. So please do that.
Please.
What a common sense approach.
Yeah, it really is. It is.
And I'm not trying to diminish any of the people I've talked to, because again, sometimes you heard those ideological blinders.
Yeah.
And you're looking at it and saying, well, you're from a Democratic administration, you must hate me. It's like, no, I don't hate you.
Oh, that's so great.
I'm here to work with you, because ultimately we need to work together. And that's the goal.
And it throws me back to I was sitting on a panel once, and people were really just roasting fossil fuel workers. And I said, hold on a second. I think we should be taking a different approach. We should be thanking these people. We reached this point in our economic development as a result of the Industrial Revolution. We would not be here without them.
You are, Micah. You are so right. I mean, this is where what those workers here, and I've had the privilege of being with those workers and watching the governor interact with these workers over the last 2 years. They feel judged in ways that are going to make them enemies when they should be our allies. And ultimately, when you ask them what their concerns are, they're afraid they're going to lose their job. They're afraid they're going to lose their livelihood. And ultimately, if you think about the people that understand how to run turbines, they understand how to manage pressure, they understand the workings of these coal and gas-fired power plants. When we're doing ground source geothermal, when we're doing, hydrogen, when we're doing other types of fuels that I know aren't central to your business every day, but you understand the value of them, because we still do need these big spinning turbines that provide frequency to the grid and all of these things. We can get all the technical details. We need balance. We need all of the above, right? These workers need to see that we are investing in clean energy jobs that relate to what they do. And we want to do that. And that is part of the carrots and the sticks that we are putting out there from a policy perspective. So you are 100% right. The only way we're going to truly get through this, red state, blue state friction, energy policy should be on all the above, all together opportunity. And yet we continue to miss it. And I think some of it is on the right and some of it is on the left. And I consider myself a progressive. And I don't mean to criticize my colleagues when I say it, but we have to focus on, you're right, the jobs, the economic value, and climate change relative to those core responsibilities that we have.
Absolutely. And I got to give a shout out to one of our Amicus partner companies. Amicus is a national solar co-op, Solar Holler, working out of West Virginia.
Those guys are great.
They're great. Awesome. They are doing an amazing job training coal workers to enter the solar industry. I think those are the types of partnerships that are just going to change the tenor of the conversation in America. It's just too much no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. It's like, no, we're all in one country here. Let's work together to build the new infrastructure. And the way that I like to describe this stuff to some people is, nobody ever said, when the typewriter was being overrun by the computer, what about the typewriter jobs? It's like, no, you got retrained in computers, and that's how we move forward as a country. And I think, all change is hard, but if you can do it the right way, and involve the people who are threatened by the change instead of vilifying or alienating them, then that's how we get things done.
No, I agree. But the other piece of it is really important from a policy perspective. You can't make it all or nothing, because then that triggers the fear, right? All the typewriters are going to disappear tomorrow, right?
Right.
Oh my God, what's going to happen? As opposed to saying, and this is, even the National Renewable Energy Laboratories will tell you this, right? We're going to have the hydrocarbon community with us for decades, right? It's going to take time. And yes, I would love to find a reason to sort of change our entire energy complex overnight. But the reality is this: is going to take planning, and it's going to take an all the above approach. So how do you go from 100% natural gas to maybe a natural gas hydrogen blend, which has less emissions, that has a solar array that's next to it in order to generate a certain amount of clean energy, that has a battery system, or even like geothermal heat storage, which can turn a turbine? All of these campuses, we have 17 coal-fired power plants have been retired in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There's only 2 left, right?
Wow.
Each of those locations are literally hundreds of acres, thousands of acres in some cases, that are adjacent to water, that are actually on good geothermal gradients, that have space for solar arrays. All of these should become all of the above energy campuses that incorporate all of these clean energy components, so that we have the resiliency that we need, and we still have some of these dispatchable resources. When you talk to a worker in Western Pennsylvania who've been working on the coal plant for 20 years, they know that it's going to take 10 years for that to emerge. If they're part of the dialogue about how and when that will emerge, that then creates the social capital that's required to get us there. If you just show up and say, I want this thing to close tomorrow, you're going to get resistance. But if you sit and explain the nature of these projects, and it goes back to what you guys know and what we said at the beginning, no construction project happens overnight.
Right.
It takes time, it takes planning, it takes resources, and you can explain that if you've lived it, like you guys have lived it. There's the planning phase, the construction phase, the sourcing, the logistics, and this and that. And it takes years. And as long as we all recognize that fact, and we work together, and we create that North Star approach, this is what we want to accomplish, then we're all going to be a lot better off. And the social capital that we need to achieve this transition will be formed. And that's what we're looking to do.
Well, Brian, this has been a great conversation. We have a tradition on here that anytime we have a great conversation, we also have to accompany it with a conversation about food.
Okay.
We love eating. We love going out. Jared, I got to warn you, has been an all-star in this thing. He's brought a number of great food, good food recommendations. So, it's really a wide open thing. You can talk about Harrisburg.
We're going to talk about ice cream. We're going to talk about ice cream. We're going to talk about ice cream.
Going in on dessert.
Here's why we're going to talk about ice cream. I'm a bit of an ice cream fanatic.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
I'm 55 now. So when I was in my early 30s, I weighed about 50 pounds more than I do today, and that's because, frankly, I started saying to myself, this is not good, right? And I started running. That became my thing, and I realized that 2,000 calories a day. I could have 1,000 calories of healthy food and a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which is generally about 1,000 calories, right? So for 2 years, I literally went from 250 to about 190, ran the Broad Street Run, half marathon, some other things, and I would be constantly eating ice cream. Then it became I need to buy a gelato maker. Then it became oh my gosh, anytime I go someplace, I am always looking for ice cream, right? So I can talk about, my favorite ice cream recipes. I can talk about some of my favorite ice cream places. Interestingly enough, every year, the Pennsylvania Tourism Board has a thing called Scooped. It's an app that you can download, and it gives you all of the sourced, ice cream places in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
No way. Really? Hold on. Say that again. Scooped? You said it's scooped?
Scooped. It's Pennsylvania Tourism Board, right? I'm on 9. One of my coworkers, Phil Ehring, is on 15, apparently. I'm way behind. I'm very, very disappointed in myself, right? So I'm going to start planning trips now in August and September to see if I can get above them,
Very
right?
Cool.
But I will give a huge shout out to Urban Churn, which has Harrisburg and Carlisle and Mechanicsburg, if my memory serves. Really, really, really fantastic ice cream. And I've kind of fallen in love with Urban Churn in Harrisburg right now, and I'm spending far too much money there.
What's your go-to flavor, Brian?
So is it to make or to buy? Because those are two very different things.
Let's go with both. Well, let's go with both. Let's hear the buy and then the make.
To make, right? When it's cherry season, I have a really good cherry amaretto chocolate chunk that I do that requires me to soak the cherries in amaretto overnight, and then I use honey, and you have to use lemon zest and a whole variety of other things to kind of offset the sweetness. And then there's some Ghirardelli chocolate that I buy that basically I shave into it, and there's vanilla, and it's really kind of a beautiful thing, I have to admit. It's kind of become my daughter's always like, oh, it's cherry season, I'm coming home. So that's really, really good, right? It's really, really good. When I'm out, I'm a lover of like a black raspberry. If somebody's got a cool black, have you ever gone to Knoebels?
Oh yes.
You got to get Knoebels, right? They have like sometimes they change it around. Like there's like a raspberry and occasionally a blackberry soft serve that's like to die for. So like that, and then but that's only in the summer. In the winter, it's just mint chocolate chip. It's got to be mint chocolate chip. If you get a really solid positive mint chocolate chip. So like if I'm in an ice cream place that I like in December, it's a mint chocolate chip. So that's my answer. There's a lot of variations on that. I've given that a lot of thought.
Good stuff. I
respect
it. I respect
Michael, what's your favorite?
Ice cream.
What's your favorite flavor?
Well, I've got a bit of a sad tale, unfortunately.
Oh no!
Happy
Are you
and
lactose
sad,
intolerant?
I am lactose intolerant.
Oh, God bless you.
True.
I'm so sorry.
But I love ice cream. Absolutely. It's one of my favorite foods.
There are some good ones out there.
I've switched to like vegan ice cream, which isn't quite. I haven't yet quite found the one, but ice cream was one of my real joys in life. I mean, it was so good, so good.
I'm sorry. Look, when you get old, there's a lot of things that you lose, right? I've actually been through cancer twice in my life. There's a couple of things that I've lost. There are things that you gain, though, right?
Yeah,
the one thing you gain. I'm sorry, Jared. I'm going to get your ice cream in a second. But the one thing you gain when you get to our age is like you know what you like.
Yeah.
And that's actually a good thing because then you can be economically and time efficient. It's like, I'm just going to have these like 5 things. So I've jokingly said to Tanya that like, when I lose the ability to eat ice cream, you might want to put me out to pasture. I mean, that's just the thing that I like.
That's it. Cut it off. Cut it off.
Jared, what's your favorite? What's your favorite?
I know this is going to sound crazy. Vanilla bean. It's my go-to. I just think it's delicious. I love getting a nice, good. I'm a Richmond's fan, so
good ice cream.
That's where I
take ice cream.
my kids.
Here's the problem, Jared. You're young, right? I mean, you are.
Yeah.
You're young. Let's admit it. You're a lot younger than us. And like when I was a kid, Breyers was like excellent. Breyers is good now, but like
Breyers was
like, oh my God, Breyers was good, right?
Yeah.
And the vanilla chocolate strawberry, it's like the mint chocolate chip and the very. I mean, like I could like live off of those two as a man. It was just really beautiful. So
for sure,
I respect the vanilla. I used like as a 10-year-old, I would be like, but as a 55-year-old, I respect the vanilla.
I gotta say, the ice cream game. I just came back. I'm very fortunate. I was able to take my family to Spain, and the ice cream game in Europe is way up there. Way up there.
I got to tell you, like one of the business plans I had about 10 years ago was, the world needs a $10 pint of ice cream. And I never did it. And now, of course, you walk into these stores and there's $10 pints of ice cream. I'm like, I could have done it. But, oh, my God, like Europe, you got some great opportunities. But again, urban churn, baby. I got to tell you, if you're ever in Harrisburg, urban churn, 3 blocks from the Capitol, it's worth it.
Okay. Well, I have to give a shout out to my friend Peter Woolsey and his restaurant, Bistro La Manette at 6th and Bainbridge. They were open for 16 years and they closed on July 31st. So sad to see them go. He was just tired of being a chef for so many years. It's hard work. But I think if you asked any restaurateur before they opened that, they would have a 16-year run and that would be it. They'd say, I'll take it in a second. And so he had, and to see, he had a number of the former chefs come back. And they're now head chefs at all of the great restaurants around Philly. And to have them come back and talk about how Bistro La Manette influenced their career path and their ability to lead a restaurant was really cool. So Philadelphia is lucky to have it for as long as we did.
It's a hard business to run. It's a hard business to manage. And anybody, you're right, who has made it through that period of time deserves a tremendous amount of credit and accolades. And congratulations.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being on. This has been really a lively conversation.
It's a privilege.
We're super excited to see what happens next, both here in the state and also with our wonderful governor, Josh Shapiro. It's very exciting, all of the news around Josh and what's going on in the United States. We're really excited about the future. So thank you for taking some time to be on the show. This has been another episode of Yo Son. I'm your host, Micah Goldmarkel, here with
Jared Pashko. Peace out, y'all.
Peace out, y'all.
Oh, the balloon!